Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special evening briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck, Director of Content at the club. Our special guest today is Dr. Shira Efron, the Diane and Guilford Glazer Foundation Senior Director of Policy Research at Israel Policy Forum. Dr. Efron has spent some 20 years in the U.S. In various think tanks, including the RAND Corporation, where she founded and led the Israel program between the years 2016 and 2022. She was also at the Center for American Progress and the Middle East Institute, and at the Tel Aviv-based Institute for National Security Studies, the INSS. In 2020 to 2022, she was a consultant with the UN team in Jerusalem, where she focused on access and movement issues relating to the Gaza Strip. Dr. Efron holds a PhD in policy analysis from Rand's Graduate School and an MA in International Relations and International Business Administration from New York University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Bachelor of Sciences in Biology and Computer Science from Tel Aviv University. Hello, Dr. Efron, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me, and Chag Sameach to those of you celebrating.
Chag Sameach to you too. So the big news today is Yahya Sinwar being killed in combat somewhere in the Gaza Strip. He died a non-dramatic death in some confrontation with soldiers. He was not taken out in some intense operation that was targeting him especially. But the fact is that the leader of Hamas and more importantly, the mastermind of October 7 is now gone. So just an hour ago, or less than an hour ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a press conference in which he announced his death. And what he said, most interestingly in this press conference, is that now he is proposing to remaining Hamas terrorists the opportunity to rehabilitate in a foreign country, which he did not name, including citizenship, financial assistance, etc., if they would lay down their arms and agree to leave Gaza. So what I would like to ask you, Dr. Efron, is where does all this leave Israel now vis-a-vis Hamas as an organization that has lost most of its commanders and leaders and is headless? And also what this means for the fate of the hostages and the continuation of the war.
Okay, so lots to unpack here, and obviously this is an evolving event. Intelligence now assesses that Sinwar was out there fighting like any other Hamas militant because he wanted to take a victory picture, outside in the open. And this, obviously, if this is true, this victory picture that he wished for cost him his life. What it means, depends how we interpret what Netanyahu says, and I assume more will come out on this, right? But if we look at this from more of a strategic point of view, the war in Gaza, the war itself really ended a month ago. The fighting continued, but the war ended. Gaza had turned into a secondary and even a tertiary front, right, after Lebanon and Iran and the multiple fronts that Israel is fighting on. And in a sense, what his symbolic death as being the last one of the Hamas leaders, but also the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, gives Israel sort of the ladder to climb down from the total victory tree and say, okay, we have won the war. We can wind down the war in Gaza, obviously, and move towards a different reality on the ground. It can also mean this indicates that Hamas is near a total end. We should double down on fighting and continue this endless war. And this all has to do with the political calculations of Netanyahu and his coalition. But in a sense, what it does allow Israel to say is, if I'm paraphrasing on what President Biden said in April after the after Israel's retaliation to Iran's attack, he said, take the win. This would be my advice. Take the win, right? This is the win. What it means for Israel regarding Hamas in the days to come, what's most pressing, and we can talk about the day after in Gaza and what it means for Hamas' future, but the most pressing and urgent task is saving the hostages. And you know, if we look at what Netanyahu said, I would argue that anyone who has information about the hostages, living hostages being a priority, obviously, they should be granted amnesty and a financial reward, a cash award. How do we do this? How do we do this in this moment in time where basically there's like, right, Hamas has no clear head. There's Sinwar, Hamadef, Marwan Issa, they're all dead. And I'll just give this, I think it is a telling and an important anecdote. When Israel declared their war aims, right, the first war aim was dismantling Hamas as a governing and military authority in Gaza. Later on, they added the hostages. If you look at the military, the IDF planners, they had explicitly written down, I think it was published in December by the Financial Times, Neri Zilper wrote it. They had explicitly wrote there that to kill Hamas leaders, Mohammadef, Yahya Sinwar, and Marwan Issa. And with all of them being dead, now is the time to pivot and wind down this war and find an immediate rescue to remaining living hostages.
Okay, thank you for this. You said that the war was essentially finished because Hamas is degraded, etc. But first of all, of course, we have the 101 hostages who are there, or 100. I'm not sure I have the correct number here. But the fact of the matter is that the soldiers who are on the ground in Gaza, Hamas is dismantled as a military force, but it kind of devolved into its roots as a guerrilla terror cells that do actions here and there against IDF soldiers with no strategic plan, just to basically inflict pain on their enemy. Now, these would be the people who would rebuild Hamas, no? Or can Israel say this is enough and we can move ahead?
With 23 of the 24 Hamas battalions being dismantled. Hamas is an organized force, as you said, with a chain of command, clear communications. This body is finished. There will always be offshoots and raw groups and splinters of what Hamas is. But you can have this anywhere. You can have this, obviously you have this in the West Bank. You can have it in Israel proper, fighting a very small scale insurgency does not amount to a full-on war. There is a difference in that regard. Now, in terms of the hostages, obviously this is a warm aim that hasn't been met, right? Hostages did come back in a deal. Some others, most of them died, came back in other rescue operations, but most of them as bodies. We have 101 hostages in Gaza inclusive. At max, 50% of them are alive, probably less. And this is why this is the most urgent task at the moment. Increased military pressure will not necessarily lead to their rescue at the moment, unless we can, that we can have more heroic operations. Those are welcome, but over a year after they've been kidnapped, that we know the horrific conditions in which they are kept, we can't take any more chances, and especially as the reports indicated, the 6 hostages that were murdered by Hamas, it was the last day of August, if I remember the day correctly. They were surrounding Sinwar toward the end of their lives, if the reports are from today are accurate. So what needs to be done, and I'm hearing reports that this is indeed something that is being floated, is having, at the moment, before we're thinking about the ceasefire and the future of Hamas and whether Yahya Sinwar's brother is replaced with, if Yahya Sinwar is replaced by his brother, and terrorists it tends to be pretty fungible, right? You always find new ones. But before that, if we could have a pause, not a permanent ceasefire, just a pause of 3 days to a week to just rearrange the scene, try to find who do you even talk to about it. Do you speak to Khaled Mashal? Do you speak to folks in Gaza? Do you create an address? Do you let the negotiation team, the Israeli negotiation team, Nisan Alon and Dedi Bar, the Mossad head, to try to revamp negotiations with the mediators. Do we create a structure? Let's just say, okay, that we don't know where all hostages are kept, and we don't know. And we don't know if some of them are with Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or with Clan X. Let's say that someone is convinced that this is time to lay their arms and provide information about a hostage in return for amnesty or cash award or both. Who do they even call? This system now needs to be created, and therefore I hope that what I'm hearing about this initiative to have just a few days of lull to see how this military achievement can be leveraged into first an agreement about the hostages, and then thinking about the day after will indeed take place.
Okay, so let me take you from this because you're implying about the thought of a mechanism, some kind of day after. Let me ask you, do you think the taking out of Sinwar, who was considered the radical, ideological, let's say not the most pragmatic leader of Hamas, do you think that increases the chances that the United Arab Emirates and or Saudi Arabia would help manage Gaza or govern Gaza after Hamas is gone? Does this increase the chance that they will, be willing to send their own people there?
The United Arab Emirates was as explicit as possible in their writings and in their public talks as they've been in private. Saudi Arabia as well, the Egyptians and other countries. They said that when they are invited by Palestinians to come help Gaza, they will come and support it. They're not going to replace the Palestinian leadership. They're not going to take over Gaza. This is an Israeli fantasy. They will come with the Gulf money to manage Gaza. They've always said that, if this comes from a legitimate Palestinian representation. I know only one, the Palestinian Authority, with all its faults, not the personas. There's no shortage of problems between the United Arab Emirates and the current Palestinian Authority leadership, but with the institutions, right, has to be affiliated with this Palestinian leadership, a formal request with a nucleus that is Palestinian governing body, and then they will come and support it and provide the envelope. What Sinwar does, in my view, and I hope the political leadership in Israel would accept it, although I'm not definitely not banking on it for other reasons, is that we've always said it will be very difficult for the Palestinians to come there, for anyone to come to Gaza and support as long as Hamas is there, and Hamas is a spoiler. To the extent that we capitalize on Sinwar being gone and all of his Hamas's important leadership being gone, literally gone, and we operate quickly, you dismantle the Hamas factor, right? So now we don't have any excuse or reason. We say, okay, Hamas is gone, so it does enable the transfer of, and slowly and gradually and responsibly, of some territory and functions to another leadership. And then you will get the rest of the world. Everyone is aligned in their vision of what comes next for Gaza. Everyone, that is, except for the current Israeli coalition. And I do hope that this moment in time convinces them that this is the best pathway forward.
Okay, thank you very much for this. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm waiting for a reporter to ask another question. In the meantime, I'll ask you, do you think this is going to affect the IDF deployment in other fronts apart from Gaza? Is this going to somehow affect the deployment of forces?
So, inside Gaza, this yet to be seen, right? There are groups in Netanyahu's coalition that are calling actively for resettling in Gaza, building again the Jewish settlements there. Again, I do hope that this creates a moment in time to pivot and go in a totally different direction. We need to see about that. But the main challenge that I'm looking at, right? We're looking at the northern front with major tactical achievement against Hezbollah, but still Hezbollah is not defeated. With a major strategic threat coming from Iran itself, Israel, we're still awaiting the Israeli retaliation against the Iranian attack on Israel. Iran, we're coming at an Iran that, I keep saying we're now October 2024, we're reflecting back at October 2023. We have October 2025 coming, and this, sort of, it sounds like something so far, but it's around the corner. This is the time when the sunset clause on the snapback sanctions, part of the nuclear agreement with Iran, is coming to effect. So meaning that there will not be an international framework for a resumption of sanctions against Iran. I think what we have now is an opportunity to use this moment in Gaza to close the front in Gaza. We retaliate in Iran, but we try to de-escalate and gather an international coalition to keep fighting proxies, but also with an eye toward preventing a nuclear Iran, and not in the ways that we are hearing some people calling for Israeli strikes on things that Israel obviously cannot do at the moment. But with the international community, with a sanction regime, and with obviously with the credible military threat, but not using just that. So there is so much to do. There are so many opportunities. This is an opportunity to stabilize Lebanon, to design Lebanon again, this is not things that Israel should be doing, but working with the international community to think how countries at the border look like, leveraging this ceasefire to strengthening the Palestinian Authority, signing the long dreamed of, normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. Nothing is going to happen anytime soon. It's not very easy, but I think I do think that if utilized rightly, this moment creates a lot of opportunities that should not be missed.
Okay, thank you for this. I want to pass a question from a CNN reporter. What will this mean domestically for Netanyahu and his government, in the sense that he's been accused of prolonging the war and not doing enough to bring back the hostages for political reasons? Can you say whether the killing of Sinwar is going to change the attitudes toward him from Israelis?
I mean, we've been seeing increased support for Netanyahu over the past few months, starting, I don't remember the exact date, but we've seen also correlation with the successful campaign against Hezbollah, with the excitement Israel had over the killing of Nasrallah. I mean, you need to remember that this goes into sort of like the gut, right? The kishke of Israeli society, the revenge, the mastermind of Sinwar. And also Netanyahu is he's the one who released him from prison, right? So I think this would play very much to his strength. And I will say also that he now can claim that everyone in the world told him not to go into Rafah, right? And Sinwar was killed in Rafah. It doesn't mean that he was in Rafah when the operation there started, but I think it lets Netanyahu to justify his many decisions in hindsight, right? Both invading Rafah, but also not backing down, not going for a ceasefire until now. So it clearly plays to his strengths politically, and with him improving in the polls as is, and not so much just his party, but also when you ask Israelis who is the most suitable person to be a prime minister, he gets the highest ranking as compared, or I mean, Naftali Bennett, anyway, Naftali Bennett a little bit more, but Naftali Bennett is not currently in the race. He's doesn't even have a party. So it does strengthen Netanyahu politically.
Okay, by the way, he did actually mention in his press conference that he was told not to go into Rafah, and he went to Rafah nevertheless. So
he did. I didn't watch his press conference because I was busy with family here. But it's funny how after so many years of Netanyahu, we know what he will say. So
I'm not sure we discussed it in the in the talk before the webinar. Also, there is this this proposed mechanism to allow people to leave, and we're not sure exactly how this can be achieved. So what I take from this, first of all, is this very important comment of yours about the JCPOA. By the way, we're talking about every country that's not the US, right? Because the US has not returned to the agreement after Trump left the White House.
Exactly.
So we're talking, okay, so we're talking about the lifting of sanctions from Germany, France, Britain, etc., those countries.
But it's the JCPOA was supported with the UN Security Council resolution, and the snapback the snapback sanction was part of the UN Security Council resolution. So it's true that the European countries still remaining in the JCPOA are those countries that you mentioned, the E3. However, in terms of like an international framework enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution, this is a mechanism that could serve the whole international community. And that's why it's so important when we are about, US elections are coming up. Whoever wins will have to find a strategy for Iran, because it's coming under his or her watch.
Yes. Now, also, if you're already in that side of the Atlantic, so let me ask you as an expert on the US, we've seen recently some, the war started with a lot of support, a very strong embrace from Biden, including the famous don't to Iran, which they did, since then twice, and he didn't, do anything back. So that's kind of a flunk. But I would like to ask you, so it seems that now after the fighting in Hezbollah is getting stronger and diminishing against Hamas, but there is still some pressure and bad blood and some threatened embargoes, etc. And I'd like to ask you how much of this has to do with the election and internal US politics, and how much of it is, genuine concern for civilians of Gaza, etc. Because we know the US doesn't fight a clean war when it fights a war. So do you think there's political reasons for that kind of American pressure?
I have no doubt that there are political reasons, but I don't think it's only political reasons. We're talking to foreign press here, but I assume foreign press knows that the Israeli public is shielded from anything that's happening in Gaza, right? The Israeli press self-censors what's happening in Gaza, but as someone who's following images in Gaza, it's very difficult to stay indifferent to what you're seeing. And, this whole talk about shared interests, but also shared values, I don't want to be cynical about it. I think that US policymakers in the Biden administration that have shown incredible support for Israel are genuinely upset. The fact that they're upset, and it also serves them politically to show that they're upset. I think that if you look back, it's clearly that being pro-Israel also comes with some costs for this administration. In terms of the language that we saw in the letter that it's a letter signed by Blinken, but also Lloyd Austin, about what they see, the perception that Israel is implementing what has come to be known as the General's Plan, which is basically a plan that calls for evacuating the civilians that remain in northern Gaza, placing a siege on that part and hoping that Hamas will surrender. This perception has been out there for a long time. I could say, this is on the record, so I'll just be careful in my words, but I was someone who works very closely on the humanitarian issues. I've been aware that this is the perception around the world for weeks now. I voiced my concerns in the Israeli defense establishment. And even if there was no sort of like a change in policy directive to implement this plan and place a siege on Gaza, it's just the confluence of events made it look like there is a total neglect on the Israeli side to address the humanitarian situation. This is something that the US was very concerned about. I mean, let's go back to, November, when the Biden administration pressed for getting fuel into Gaza, and then the World Central Kitchen incident, right? There have been a lot of things along the ways, and forcing Israel to open crossing and not going to Rafah. it's hard to separate between all those things, but there seems to be a genuine U.S. concerns for what's happening in Gaza. And I got to tell you, as someone, I guess, Israeli, American, doesn't matter, but living in Israel at the moment, that while I don't think that Hamas and Sinwar ever cared for Gaza's civilians, but the fact that we have 90% of Gaza's civilians now displaced, that we have polio that is contained, but many other diseases, that we have no plan for the winter that's coming. Where are all those people going to be, and how are they going to be safe? That kids in Gaza have not gone to school for a year. I mean, I think in this was a just war, but in the long run, I think it does not save Israel's interest. And it's not just a moral imperative, right, and a legal question. It's strategic, because, as you noted, to see a letter like this and a threat of essentially an arms ban by the United States is something that we haven't expected earlier on, and we're seeing it now. And you know, there are arms embargoes by the UK, by Italy, which has a right-wing government, and several other governments in the world. So, you know, I think, sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but I think, you know, even if it's political, it's also something that I think people in the administration really care about.
Yes, I would just like to add, first of all, that Israel did allow the polio vaccination campaign, so I don't think it can be considered to be in complete disregard of civilians. And also, I mean, the mechanisms of lawyers in the army of approving and incriminating targets, I think, are quite robust. But I would like to, from this, I would like to just like say.
Sorry, I'll just say, no, of course, the polio was I wrote an article for CFR, and I'm happy to share with people here, but I think the polio campaign that was so successful reflects how when Israel and the international humanitarian community share interest and want to work together, they can do it so well. So this is actually a success, right? And I think this is what we should learn from, and reflecting back on the last year and say, like, let's capitalize on these successes, work together and improve this. But I think the perception was that Israel is disregarding many other elements, and that's why the letter came about. And there are many people in Israel, by the way, in the IDF, also COGAD, obviously, that don't disregard this element, but it hasn't received the weight that I think it should have received.
Yes, I would also like to just to add for our listeners that regarding the Gilboa Island plan, there's reports, but we don't really know whether what Israel is doing in the northern Gaza Strip is implementing parts of the plan. From what I understand from news agency reports, the officials saying that Israel is doing that are not Israeli officials, so that would be their interpretation of Israeli actions on the ground and trying to understand what they are. I'm not sure Israel is working intensively in the northern Gaza Strip, but it's the aims of the military there, or whether there's like a long-term strategic plan for the north of Gaza, is not something we all can. We can't just say Israel is carrying out the Gilboa Island general's plan. I mean, that's just to clarify.
Sorry, it's important for me to say, I didn't say that Israel's implementing it. I think there's a perception that Israel's implementing it. There was no policy directive to implement it.
Yeah, exactly.
But the perception unfortunately matters. And that's why
perception does matter. And we all thought the UNRWA, for example, was perceived as a legitimate UN agency and turned out to be a sort of mutation of the UN with the terror organization, basically. And in that sense, Israel feels a bit betrayed. I would like to just wrap it up with a question from a reporter from Iran International, a dissident Iranian outlet. And he says Iran's Islamic regime has lost all the big influence in the region. Is this a sign that they're slowing down in the future? Or is Iran really rushing towards a direct confrontation with Israel?
This is a question for the Iranians, but I think Iran is now also at the moment of critical decisions. Clearly, when Iran, its strategy was right, it had three sort of prongs. There was the nuclear program, which is actually advancing. There is the ring of fire, the proxies around Israel, not only Israel, but right, the ring of all these proxies that threaten U.S. partners in the region. And there's also all the arsenal of missiles and rockets and drones that we're seeing. And with dwindling of the arsenal, and obviously major blows to its access, I think now Iran is probably assessing and thinking, you as representing an Iranian network probably knows this well, but Iran has a leader who is 85 years old with an echo chamber of IRGC and Islamic, and on the other hand, you have a new president, very Western oriented. Clearly, in my mind, his appointment indicates that Iran does want a new nuclear agreement. How do we capitalize on the multiple dimensions and the fighting now to achieve that and ensure that Iran is more flexible and agrees to an improved agreement? I think this is the major push that the U.S. and Israel and their partners should be pushing now, right? It's maximum pressure on the proxies, which is achieving results, creating an effective sanction regime, and leaving a credible threat, military threat, that if all else fails, we're gonna act. This obviously is not something that Israel can do alone, but it would be wise for the U.S., whoever next president is, but also Europeans, to capitalize on Israel's tactical successes on the battlefield now, and there are major ones, right, in Lebanon, and in Gaza, and obviously on other fronts as well, and think how this weakens Iran. But I also think, living here, we need to think of what Gaza looks like, what the West Bank looks like, what kind of Palestinians, the Palestinian question, as much as we all wanted to sideline this idea, and the Biden administration didn't address it at all, right, proactively. If I think about US administrations, right, it totally sidelined this issue. Palestinians are not going anywhere. Israelis are not going anywhere. We have to find a way to think of a better future for everyone here in the region. But first, the hostages.
Yes, correct. Well, the Biden administration spent the first 2 years of achieving a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, scolding Saudi Arabia over the killing of the journalist who happened to be not such an angel himself. But I thank you very much, Dr. Efron, for your time. And I would just like to say, when a person like Yahya Sinwar leaves this earth, at the end of the day, it's almost net value good, because this was a murderous psychopath. He was a leader of political terror movement, but obviously a man of very few limitations when it comes to exercising cruelty, and it doesn't matter who were the victims. And I think it becomes more poignant when we think about the fact that the 6 hostages, that broke our hearts just a few months ago were held so close to him. So his list of sins is long, and it's a good thing that he finally, he achieved his comeuppance. So thank you again for your time, Dr. Efron, and I appreciate you doing this webinar at such short notice.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.